Sassanid Empire, the rise and fall, Persia's forgotten giant. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world where two great powers dominate everything around them. On one side, the mighty Roman Empire with its legions, emperors, and famous cities like Constantinople and Rome. On the other side, across deserts and mountains, there stood another empire just as powerful, just as sophisticated, but far less remembered today. This was the Sassanid Empire, the last great Persian dynasty before the rise of Islam. The Sassanid Empire lasted from the year 224 to the year 651 CE. For over 4 centuries, it stood as Rome's equal, Rome's rival, and sometimes Rome's nightmare. It ruled from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Armenia. At its height, it controlled trade routes stretching from India to the Mediterranean, and its kings called themselves Shahanshah, the King of Kings. Yet when we think of great empires, we often mention Rome, Byzantium, China, or Egypt. The Sassanids rarely appear in that conversation. They are often overshadowed, their memory pushed into the shadows of history. But without them, the ancient world makes little sense. Their rivalry with Rome shaped centuries of warfare and diplomacy. Their culture influenced art, religion, and politics for generations to come. And their downfall opened the door for a new rising power, the Islamic Caliphate. The story of the Sassanid Empire is not a simple tale. It is a story of ambition and reform, of triumphs and tragedies. It is the story of kings who dreamed of world conquest, of battles that shook civilizations, and of a society built on faith, tradition, and order. Like all great empires, it had its rise, its golden age, and its collapse. To understand the Sassanids, we must first picture the world before their rise. In the early 3rd century CE, the mighty Roman Empire was already split into East and West. It had survived crises, rebellions, and invasions. To the east, in the lands of Persia, another empire, the Parthians, ruled. But the Parthians were weak. Their nobles fought each other, their kings were powerless, and their subjects longed for strong leadership. It was into this vacuum that the Sassanids marched. From the province of Persis, a man named Ardashir rose. His ambition was clear. He did not want to remain a local prince. He wanted to restore the glory of Cyrus the Great and Darius of the Achaemenid Empire. He wanted Persia to be strong again. And with fire and steel, he began building a new dynasty. The Sassanid Empire would last more than 400 years. It would fight Rome in endless wars. It would shine as a cultural beacon, influencing art, religion, and philosophy across Asia and Europe. It would reform government law and the economy, setting standards that later Islamic rulers would adopt. But it would also suffer from overreach, internal divisions, and devastating wars that drained its strength. In the end, it would fall to a new power, one no one saw coming. A people united not by kings or nobles, but by a new faith sweeping out of Arabia. The fall was swift, shocking, and final. Tonight in this story, we will walk through the history of the Sassanid Empire. We will see its birth, its conquests, its flowering, and its collapse. We will place its rulers in their times, from Ardashir to Yazdegerd III. We will see the clash of armies, the struggle of religions, and the daily life of people who lived in its cities and villages. This is not just a story of battles and kings. It is the story of how power rises, how it is maintained, and how it slips away. It is a story with lessons that still matter today. The Sassanid Empire, Persia's forgotten giant. Its rise and fall is a tale worth remembering. The world before the Sassanids. Before the Sassanids rose to power, Persia was ruled by the Parthian Empire. The Parthians had held control since the middle of the 3rd century BCE, and for almost 500 years, they had fought, negotiated, and survived against Rome. But by the early 3rd century CE, the Parthian state was crumbling. The Parthians were not weak in land or resources. Their empire stretched from Mesopotamia to Iran, from Armenia to parts of Central Asia. They controlled some of the richest trade routes in the ancient world. But their system of government was fragile. At the heart of their weakness was the power of noble families. These great lords held their own lands, their own armies, and often acted like kings in miniature. The Parthian ruler, called the King of Kings, often had little more authority than a first among equals. This structure worked in times of peace, but in times of war it was disastrous. When Rome invaded, Parthian nobles often quarreled instead of uniting. When taxes needed to be collected, the king relied on the goodwill of aristocrats, who might withhold money or soldiers for their own advantage. Rival claimants to the throne appeared again and again, throwing the empire into civil war. Rome exploited these weaknesses. From the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE, Rome and Parthia fought many wars over Mesopotamia, Armenia, and Syria. Sometimes the Parthians won, as in the famous defeat of Crassus at Carrhae in 53 BCE, but often they were forced to retreat. Roman generals like Trajan and Septimius Severus pushed deep into Mesopotamia. Although Rome never held these lands for long, each invasion exposed Parthia's disunity. The Parthian capital, Ctesiphon, was captured more than once. In 197 CE, the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus sacked it again. Though the city survived, the humiliation was clear. To the people of Persia, it was proof that the Parthian system was no longer strong enough to protect them. At the same time, economic pressures were building. The Silk Road trade was profitable, but corruption and noble monopolies drained wealth from the state. Peasants carried heavy burdens of taxation, while nobles often paid little. Local governors acted independently, enriching themselves rather than strengthening the empire. Religion added another layer of unrest. The Parthians were tolerant, but their empire lacked a single unifying faith. Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion, survived, but was not strongly promoted by Parthian kings. Other religions, including Greek cults, Judaism, and Christianity, spread through the empire. Instead of unity, there was fragmentation. By the year 220 CE, the empire was nearing collapse. Civil wars erupted between rival claimants to the throne. The nobility was more concerned with their own estates than with defending the state. Rome pressed harder at the borders. In the east, new threats appeared from nomadic tribes and Central Asian powers. It was at this moment that a new leader emerged from the province of Persis in today's southern Iran. His name was Ardashir, and he came from a family with deep ties to Zoroastrian tradition. Unlike the Parthians, he believed in strong, centralized kingship. Unlike the weak rulers of Ctesiphon, he was ready to use the sword to claim power. The world before the Sassanids was one of opportunity and crisis. The Parthians had ruled long, but their time was ending. Persia needed unity. Persia needed strength. And soon the Sassanid dynasty would provide both. The rise of Ardashir IV. In the dusty plains of Persis, the region we now call Fars in southern Iran, a new leader began his climb to power. His name was Ardashir. Born around the year 180 CE, he was the son of Papak, a local ruler tied to the Zoroastrian temple at Istakhr. Ardashir grew up in a time when the Parthian Empire was weakening. The nobles fought among themselves. The kings in Ctesiphon could not enforce their rule. For an ambitious man, this weakness looked like an open door. Ardashir began small. At first, he was the commander of a fortress. Then, through marriage alliances and force, he expanded his control over Persis. He proved himself skilled at both diplomacy and war. He understood that to succeed, he had to build loyalty at home before he challenged the Parthians. By uniting the local tribes and nobles under his command, he laid the foundations of a new dynasty. By 298 CE, Ardashir was strong enough to challenge neighboring rulers. He conquered nearby provinces one by one, testing his growing army in battle. His strategy was simple: move, quickly strike hard, and reward loyalty. He also tied his conquests to religion. As a follower of Zoroastrianism, he claimed divine support for his cause. Temples supported him, priests blessed his rule, and this alliance gave him legitimacy that Parthian kings lacked. The decisive moment came in 224 CE. The Parthian king Artabanus IV finally recognized the threat and marched to stop Ardashir. Their armies clashed at the Battle of Hormozgan, near the ancient city of Isfahan. The battle was fierce. Parthian cavalry thundered across the field, but Ardashir's forces were disciplined and determined. By the end of the day, Artabanus lay dead, and the Parthian line had broken. With that victory, the Parthian Empire ended, and the Sassanid Empire was born. Ardashir rode into Ctesiphon, the old Parthian capital, and declared himself Shahanshah, King of Kings. It was not just a claim of kingship. It was a deliberate echo of the ancient Achaemenid rulers like Cyrus and Darius, who had ruled Persia centuries before. Ardashir wanted everyone to know the glory of old Persia was reborn, but conquest was only the beginning. Ardashir knew that empires did not survive on victories alone. They needed structure, order, and belief. He began to centralize power, reducing the independence of nobles and insisting on direct loyalty to the crown. He worked closely with the Zoroastrian priesthood, making the faith not just a religion, but the official backbone of the state. Fire temples spread, rituals were standardized, and priests gained influence in government. This bond between crown and faith became a defining feature of the Sassanid world. Ardashir also turned outward. He tested Roman strength with border raids probing the frontier. Though he did not yet achieve large territorial gains, these conflicts signaled to the world that Persia was no longer weak. The new empire was ambitious, restless, and ready for expansion. Politically, Ardashir reshaped administration. Governors answered directly to the king. Taxes were more organized, feeding both the army and the royal treasury. Land was redistributed, weakening some of the old Parthian aristocracy and strengthening the monarchy. In the military, cavalry remained dominant, but discipline and hierarchy were sharpened. Soldiers were not just followers of local lords, they were defenders of the empire. By the time of his death in 242 CE, Ardashir had set the stage for centuries of Sassanid power. He had united Persia under one throne. He had revived the memory of the Achaemenids, giving his people pride and identity. And he had built a partnership between religion and monarchy that gave his dynasty legitimacy in the eyes of both subjects and priests. The rise of Ardashir was not just the story of one man. It was the story of a people reclaiming their past. Out of the ruins of the Parthians, a new order had come, one that would stand against Rome, shape the Silk Road, and leave its mark on the history of the world. The new order, central power, and religion. When Ardashir claimed victory over the Parthians, he did more than create a new dynasty. He built a new order for Persia. The Parthians had ruled loosely, allowing nobles great independence. Ardashir rejected this model. He believed in unity, in a strong crown, and in a divine mission. The Sassanid Empire was not just another kingdom. It was designed as a sacred monarchy where politics and religion worked hand in hand. The first change was centralization. Under the Parthians, local aristocrats controlled their estates like miniature kings. They collected taxes, commanded armies, and often defied the royal court. Ardashir stripped much of this power away. He placed governors in provinces who answered directly to him. He built a stronger bureaucracy with scribes, tax collectors, and administrators loyal to the throne. Land once dominated by Parthian noble families was seized and redistributed. By weakening the aristocracy, he made the monarchy the true center of power. This restructuring required money, and money came through taxation. Ardashir organized a fairer but stricter tax system. Farmers paid in crops, merchants in silver, and landholders in service or coin. These revenues fed two things above all: the army and the royal court. The Sassanids became known for their wealth, not because of scattered tribute, but because of a controlled and calculated system of collection. The second pillar of the new order was religion. Ardashir leaned heavily on Zoroastrianism, the ancient faith of Persia. This was not accidental. By elevating Zoroastrianism to the position of state religion, he gave his dynasty divine legitimacy. The King of Kings was not only a political ruler, but also the earthly protector of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light and truth. Zoroastrian priests called Magi gained great influence under this system. They oversaw fire temples where sacred flames burned as symbols of purity and divine presence. They codified rituals, prayers, and doctrine, strengthening unity in belief. The Magi also worked closely with the crown, advising on law, justice, and morality. This partnership gave the monarchy a sacred aura. Obedience to the king became not just political duty, but also religious duty. The symbolism of this bond appeared everywhere. In royal inscriptions, Ardashir and later kings were shown receiving the divine ring of authority from Ahura Mazda. This image told subjects that the king's power was not human invention, it was heavenly sanction. To rebel against the king was to rebel against the will of the gods. Socially, this new order shaped the empire. Society was divided into clear classes: the aristocracy and great houses, the priesthood, the warriors, and the common people. Each class had duties and privileges. Farmers sustained the economy. Soldiers defended the frontiers. Priests guided the soul. Nobles served as administrators and generals, but under the watchful eye of the king. It was a structured world where order was sacred and disruption dangerous. Militarily, the reforms strengthened the Sassanid army. Cavalry was the backbone, especially the elite cataphracts, heavily armored horsemen who could smash enemy lines. Infantry and archers supported them. Siegecraft improved, allowing the Sassanids to challenge Roman fortresses. Soldiers were now directly tied to the king's service, not just to local lords, ensuring loyalty in war. Culturally, the Sassanid court became a center of grandeur. Ceremonies grew elaborate. Kings were addressed with reverence, surrounded by ritual and splendor. Palaces rose with impressive halls and decorations that displayed royal power. These displays reinforced the message: the Sassanids were chosen rulers, protectors of faith, heirs to the Achaemenid legacy. This new order had long-term consequences. By uniting politics and religion, Ardashir created stability and legitimacy that lasted for centuries. But he also created a system that was rigid. The centralization of power left little room for flexibility. The close tie between crown and priesthood meant that any challenge to the throne could also be painted as heresy. This gave strength, but also seeds of future weakness. For now, however, the Sassanid Empire was solid. Ardashir's vision had turned Persia into a state that could stand as Rome's equal. His son and successor, Shapur I, would soon prove this on the battlefield. Shapur I, conqueror and builder. When Ardashir died in 242 CE, the throne passed to his son Shapur I. If Ardashir had been the founder, the builder of the system, Shapur was the conqueror, who would show the world that the Sassanid Empire was not just stable, it was powerful, ambitious, and capable of shaking Rome itself. Shapur inherited a well-organized state. Taxes flowed into the treasury, the nobility was under control, and Zoroastrianism gave the monarchy sacred legitimacy. But Shapur wanted more than stability. He wanted glory. He wanted the Sassanid name to be feared from the Mediterranean to the Indus. His reign began with challenges. In the east, the Kushan kingdom and nomadic groups tested Persian strength. Shapur campaigned against them, securing Central Asian frontiers and integrating trade routes into his empire. These victories gave him resources, soldiers, and prestige. Yet the real test came from the west, the eternal rival Rome. In 243 CE, the Roman Emperor Gordian III marched east with a massive army to recover lost ground. The Romans met Shapur near the Euphrates. At first, Gordian seemed victorious, but the tide soon turned. Roman supply lines stretched thin, desert conditions took their toll, and Shapur pressed the advantage. Gordian died during the campaign, possibly in battle, or perhaps assassinated by his own men. Either way, it was a disaster for Rome. Gordian's successor, Philip the Arab, had no choice but to sue for peace. In 244 CE, he agreed to pay heavy tribute to the Sassanids. For the first time, Rome was forced to acknowledge the new Persian dynasty as its equal. Shapur celebrated this triumph in inscriptions carved into rock cliffs, declaring to all future generations that Persia had humbled mighty Rome. But Shapur's ambitions did not stop there. In 260 CE, he faced Rome again. This time, the Roman emperor was Valerian. The two armies clashed near Edessa in Mesopotamia. The result was unprecedented in Roman history. Valerian was captured alive along with tens of thousands of Roman soldiers. The emperor of Rome, the master of the legions, became Shapur's prisoner. This was the ultimate humiliation for Rome. Never before had one of its emperors been taken captive on the battlefield. Roman writers later told stories that Shapur used Valerian as a human footstool when mounting his horse, or that Valerian died in captivity and his skin was stuffed as a trophy. Whether these tales are exaggerated or not, the message was clear: the balance of power had shifted. Persia was no longer a shadow of its past. Under Shapur, it was a world power. Shapur did not limit himself to war. He was also a builder and patron of culture. He founded cities, many named after himself, such as Gundashapur in Khuzestan. These cities became centers of administration, trade, and learning. Gundashapur in particular later grew into a hub of scholarship combining Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge. Religion in Shapur's reign was complex. While Zoroastrianism remained central, Shapur also tolerated other faiths. Christianity was beginning to spread. Judaism was long established, and a new religion, Manichaeism, appeared during his reign. Its founder Mani preached a blend of Zoroastrian, Christian, and Buddhist ideas. At first, Shapur allowed him to teach and even debated him at court. This openness reflected Shapur's confidence as a ruler. He was strong enough to permit diversity. Economically, his empire thrived. Trade flowed across the Silk Road, linking China, India, and the Mediterranean. Goods like silk, spices, and precious stones enriched Persian markets. Agriculture remained the backbone, supported by irrigation systems and royal estates. Wealth from conquest and commerce strengthened the army and funded construction projects. Militarily, Shapur expanded the use of heavy cavalry fortresses and siege engines. His victories against Rome were not luck, but preparation and discipline. He used mobility, strong supply lines, and effective coordination of cavalry and infantry. The capture of Valerian proved that the Sassanid army could match and even surpass the legions of Rome. By the time of his death in 270 CE, Shapur, I had transformed the Sassanid Empire from a strong kingdom into a true superpower. He had defeated 2 Roman emperors, humiliated Rome on the world stage, and secured Persia's eastern and western frontiers. He had built cities, promoted learning, and given his dynasty prestige that would last for centuries. The legacy of Shapur I was both pride and burden. Pride because he had made Persia feared and respected. Burden because future kings would feel compelled to live up to his example of conquest and dominance. The rivalry with Rome was now fully set in stone. Neither side could afford to back down, and for centuries to come, their wars would shape the destiny of the Near East. The balance of power with Rome. From the 3rd century onward, the Near East became the stage for one of history's greatest rivalries. On one side stood the Roman Empire, later its eastern half, Byzantium. On the other side stood the Sassanid Empire. These 2 giants faced each other across the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, over the rugged lands of Armenia, and along the deserts of Syria. Their wars were brutal, costly, and endless. Yet their rivalry also created a strange kind of balance, a balance that held the ancient world together for centuries. The frontier between the 2 empires was not a single line, but a shifting zone of contested ground. Mesopotamia, with its rich farmland and great rivers, was the heart of Sassanid power, centered at Ctesiphon on the Tigris. Rome often sought to seize this region, but holding it was difficult. The desert, the heat, and Persian resistance made long-term occupation nearly impossible. Conversely, the Persians looked westward at Roman Syria, Asia Minor, and even Egypt, but these regions were far from their base, and Roman legions stood ready. Thus, the frontier became a seesaw of raids, campaigns, victories, and defeats. The wars were not merely about land. They were about prestige. For Rome, victory over Persia was proof that it still commanded the world, even as it struggled with crises at home. For Persia, defeating Rome was a declaration that it had revived the glory of Cyrus and Darius. Each battle was not just military, it was symbolic, a contest of civilizations. One of the most fiercely contested regions was Armenia. Perched between the 2 empires, Armenia acted as both buffer and prize. Its kings often shifted allegiance, sometimes leaning toward Rome, sometimes toward Persia. Control of Armenia gave access to the Caucasus, the Black Sea, and trade routes from Central Asia. Wars in Armenia erupted again and again, with both empires installing their preferred rulers. The Armenians themselves paid the heaviest price, caught in a struggle that was never truly their own. The rivalry also shaped diplomacy. Despite constant conflict, Rome and Persia signed many treaties. In 298 CE, after years of fighting, Rome forced the Persians into the Treaty of Nisibis. This agreement gave Rome territories in northern Mesopotamia and Armenia. But the advantage did not last. By the 4th century, the Sassanids struck back, and the frontier shifted once again. In 363 CE, the Roman Emperor Julian launched an ambitious invasion deep into Persian territory. He marched with a vast army aiming to seize Ctesiphon. Yet his campaign ended in disaster. Julian was killed in battle, and his successor was forced to sign a humiliating peace ceding territory to the Persians. Once more, the balance tipped. This back-and-forth struggle consumed vast resources. Neither empire could afford to ignore the other. Armies, fortresses, and garrisons lined the frontier. Trade routes were taxed, and merchants had to navigate the dangers of war. Cities near the border often changed hands, suffering repeated destruction. Yet paradoxically, the rivalry also stabilized the region. Both Rome and Persia prevented smaller states or nomadic tribes from filling the gap. Their rivalry, though destructive, maintained a kind of order. For centuries, the ancient Near East was divided between these two powers, with no third rival strong enough to challenge them. Culturally, the rivalry pushed both empires to define themselves more clearly. Rome emphasized its Greco-Roman traditions, law, and Christianity after Constantine. Persia emphasized its Zoroastrian faith, its monarchy, and its Achaemenid heritage. Each saw the other as the great other, a mirror that reflected its own identity more strongly. Economically, wars were costly, but trade never ceased entirely. Merchants carried silk, spices, and precious goods across the frontier. Treaties often included provisions for commerce, showing that even in conflict, both sides recognized the value of exchange. Persian carpets, Roman glassware, and Chinese silk passed hands, despite the hostility of kings and emperors. By the late 4th and 5th centuries, this balance of power became almost predictable. Neither empire could destroy the other. Each victory was temporary, each defeat recoverable. The wars became part of the rhythm of life. Armies marched, cities burned, peace was signed, and then war returned. This long rivalry shaped the world of late antiquity. It drained resources, hardened borders, and defined identities. It prepared the stage for the dramatic confrontations of the 6th and 7th centuries, when the balance would break and both empires would pay the price. For now, though, the balance of power between Rome and Persia stood firm. Two giants locked in endless struggle, holding each other in check, shaping the destiny of the known world. Cultural flowering and society. The Sassanid Empire was not only a kingdom of soldiers and kings. It was also a world of artists, thinkers, priests, and ordinary people who gave life to its cities, villages, and traditions. To understand why the empire endured for over 4 centuries, we must look beyond battles. We must look at its culture and society, where daily life and royal grandeur were woven together. At the top of society stood the Shahanshah, the King of Kings. He was more than a ruler. He was seen as chosen by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. Around him stretched a world of ritual and ceremony. The Sassanid court was famous for its splendor. When the king appeared, nobles prostrated themselves before him. His crown was heavy with jewels so weighty that it sometimes had to be suspended from chains when he sat on his throne. Everything about the monarchy was designed to project awe, power, and divine authority. But beneath the crown was a structured society. Sassanid Persia was divided into clear social classes. First came the aristocracy, the great houses that traced their ancestry back centuries. These noble families held land, commanded soldiers, and often married into the royal line. Next came the priesthood, the guardians of Zoroastrian faith, who managed fire temples, presided over rituals, and advised the crown on matters of law and justice. Below them stood the warriors, professional soldiers, who defended the empire's borders. Finally, the vast majority of people were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, the backbone of the economy. This structure gave stability, but also rigidity. Mobility between classes was rare. A farmer was likely to remain a farmer. A priest's son usually became a priest. The idea was that each class had its sacred duty. To break from that duty was to disturb the divine order. Religion was everywhere in daily life. Zoroastrian fire temples burned with sacred flames kept alive by priests who tended them day and night. Families prayed before fire altars in their homes. The calendar revolved around religious festivals such as Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which celebrated the renewal of life and the triumph of light over darkness. Laws reflected religious values, stressing truth, purity, and the constant struggle between good and evil. Cities were lively centers of culture. Ctesiphon, the capital, grew into one of the largest cities of its time. Along the Tigris River, its palaces and gardens displayed royal wealth. while its markets bustled with goods from every corner of the known world. From India came spices and jewels. From China came silk. From Rome came glassware and wine. Persian carpets, known for their beauty, became prized exports. Art and architecture flourished. Sassanid palaces featured grand halls with soaring arches and domes. Relief carvings on cliffs and rocks told stories of royal victories, like Shapur's capture of the Roman Emperor Valerian. These images were not just decoration, they were propaganda reminders to subjects and enemies alike of Persia's strength. In literature, oral traditions thrived. Stories of heroes and kings, some dating back to Achaemenid times, were preserved by storytellers and priests. These tales would later inspire the great Persian epic the Shahnameh, written centuries after the fall of the Sassanids, but rooted in their cultural memory. Knowledge also flowed into Persia. Greek philosophy, Indian science, and Mesopotamian wisdom blended with native traditions. The Sassanids preserved and transmitted much of this knowledge, shaping the intellectual world of later Islamic civilization. Family life was centered around duty and tradition. Men held authority in law and custom, but women were not without influence. Noble women sometimes managed estates or acted as patrons of temples. Marriage was central, often arranged and tied to family alliances. In villages, life revolved around farming cycles, irrigation, and local customs. Despite the grandeur of the empire, most people lived simple lives tied to the land. Militarily, society supported the army through taxes and service. Farmers provided food, craftsmen produced weapons, and nobles offered warriors. Every class had its role in keeping the empire strong. This cultural flowering gave the Sassanid Empire more than power, it gave it identity. People saw themselves as part of an ancient tradition, heirs to Cyrus and Darius, guided by Zoroastrian faith, and led by kings who ruled with divine authority. It was a proud identity, one that allowed the Sassanids to resist Rome, absorb foreign influences, and endure through centuries of conflict. Yet the same strength carried seeds of weakness. The rigid class system left little room for change. The close tie between religion and state gave stability, but also intolerance, especially toward growing Christian and Manichaean communities. These tensions, though small at first, would later add to the empire's troubles. For now, however, the Sassanid Empire stood as a beacon of culture. Its art, religion, and society gave it depth and resilience. It was not only an empire of war, it was an empire of civilization, economy, and trade. Behind the splendor of palaces and the thunder of cavalry, the Sassanid Empire rested on something quieter, but just as vital: the economy. Without wealth, armies could not march, temples could not shine, and kings could not rule. The Sassanids understood this, and they built one of the most dynamic economies of the ancient world. The backbone of the economy was agriculture. Most people lived in villages tied to the land, growing wheat, barley, dates, and fruits. In the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the rivers Tigris and Euphrates provided water for irrigation. In the highlands of Iran, terraces and qanats underground, water channels brought life to dry soil. Farmers supplied food not only for themselves, but also for cities, armies, and markets. Taxation of agriculture provided the crown with steady revenue. Grain, livestock, and wine moved along caravan routes from countryside to palace storerooms. But agriculture alone did not make Persia wealthy. Geography gave the Sassanids a gift. Their empire sat in the middle of the Silk Road, the great network of trade routes linking China, India, and the Mediterranean. This position made Persia a bridge between East and West, a middleman who profited from every exchange. Silk from China passed through Persian markets on its way to Rome. Spices from India, pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, were carried across deserts and mountains to reach Byzantine kitchens. Precious stones, pearls from the Persian Gulf, fine textiles, and carpets woven in Persian workshops became prized commodities. In return, Persia imported glassware, wine, olive oil, and luxury goods from the Roman and later Byzantine worlds. Trade was not limited to luxury. Everyday goods moved along the same routes: iron, copper, leather, and grain. Persian merchants became skilled negotiators, operating caravans that crossed dangerous deserts and mountain passes. Cities like Ctesiphon, Shapur, and Nishapur became hubs of commerce, their markets filled with goods from far-off lands. The crown managed trade carefully. Customs duties were collected at borders and caravan stations. Certain goods, such as silk, were treated as royal monopolies. This meant that only the crown could officially trade them, ensuring wealth flowed directly into the royal treasury. Such policies strengthened the monarchy, but sometimes angered private merchants who found themselves limited by royal control. Coinage was another key to the economy. The Sassanids minted silver drachms in vast numbers, stamped with the image of the king on one side and a Zoroastrian fire altar on the other. These coins circulated widely, not only within Persia, but also beyond its borders. They were found as far away as India, Central Asia, and even Scandinavia, proof of Persia's role in global trade. The reliability of Sassanid coinage made it trusted by merchants and stable for the economy. Urban life thrived on trade. Cities bustled with craftsmen, blacksmiths, weavers, potters, and jewelers. Guilds formed, regulating work and ensuring quality. Markets were lively places filled with noise, colors, and smells. Merchants shouted their prices, buyers bargained, and goods changed hands in endless streams. The wealth of cities supported not only commerce, but also culture, as palaces, gardens, and temples rose from the profits of trade. Economically, the empire was diverse. Some regions specialized in certain products. Fars, the homeland of the Sassanid dynasty, produced fine textiles and carpets. Khuzestan became famous for its date palms and fertile fields. The Persian Gulf brought pearls and fish. The eastern provinces connected to India supplied spices and precious stones. Each region contributed to the whole, creating an economy that was both regional and imperial. Yet prosperity had its limits. Heavy taxation weighed on peasants. While nobles and priests enjoyed privileges, common farmers often struggled. Drought, floods, or war could destroy harvests and leave villages in poverty. Trade, too, was vulnerable. Wars with Rome disrupted routes. Bandits and nomads threatened caravans. Even so, the overall system proved resilient, bouncing back after crises. The economic strength of the Sassanid Empire had far-reaching consequences. It funded endless wars with Rome and Byzantium. It paid for the construction of palaces, bridges, and canals. It supported scholarship, medicine, and philosophy in cities like Shapur. It allowed the Sassanids to maintain a standing army capable of matching Rome for centuries. The economy also connected Persia to the wider world. Ideas, religions, and cultures traveled along with goods. Christianity spread into Persia through trade routes. Buddhism reached the empire from India. Even Manichaeism, born in Persia, spread outward along the same roads. Commerce was not just about goods. It was about exchange of culture, knowledge, and belief. In the end, the Sassanid economy was both a source of strength and a mark of vulnerability. Its wealth made it a tempting target for Rome, Byzantium, and later the Arabs. Its reliance on trade meant that war could choke its lifelines. But for centuries, the Sassanid economy stood as one of the most vibrant of late antiquity, proof that empires are not built by armies alone, but also by the hands of farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. The Golden Age under Khosrow, Shapur I 531-579 CE. By the 6th century, the Sassanid Empire had faced centuries of war with Rome, internal struggles and pressures from nomads on its eastern frontiers. Yet it was during this turbulent era that one of its greatest rulers rose to power, Khosrow, also known as Anushirvan, which means of the immortal soul. His reign from 531 to 579 CE is remembered as the empire's golden age, a time of reform stability and cultural brilliance. When Khosrow came to the throne, he inherited an empire strained by constant conflict with Byzantium. His father Khosrow had fought repeated wars, but also faced internal revolts, most famously the Mazdakite movement, a radical social and religious uprising that called for the redistribution of wealth and even the sharing of property and women. This movement threatened the traditional order of Persian society, undermining nobles and priests alike. Khosrow crushed the Mazdakites, restoring the balance of power between crown nobility and clergy. Yet he also learned from the crisis that reforms were necessary to keep the empire stable. One of Khosrow's greatest achievements was his reform of the tax system. Instead of relying on irregular tribute or arbitrary demands from nobles, he introduced fixed assessments based on land surveys. Taxes were calculated according to the fertility of the land and the harvest it could produce. This created fairness and predictability, reducing corruption and ensuring steady revenue for the state. Farmers, though still heavily taxed, benefited from a system that was at least more consistent and less open to abuse. Khosrow also reorganized the military. The Sassanid army had long relied on noble families to provide cavalry. Khosrow introduced a more professional system. He created a standing force maintained by the state and stationed soldiers in frontier zones, with land grants to support them. These soldiers, known as the Aswaran, formed a disciplined corps of heavy cavalry supported by infantry and auxiliaries. With these reforms, Persia could better defend its borders against nomadic raids from the east and Byzantine attacks from the west. Culturally, Khosrow's reign shone brightly. He was a patron of philosophy, science, and medicine. His court became a gathering place for scholars from across the known world. After the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed the Academy of Athens in 529 CE, many Greek philosophers fled to Persia, where Khosrow welcomed them. At Shapur in southwestern Persia, a great academy of learning flourished. It combined Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian traditions. Here, medicine, advanced astronomy was studied, and translations of important works were made into Middle Persian and later into Arabic. Khosrow also reformed administration. He divided the empire into 4 great regions, each governed by a military commander loyal to the crown. This improved efficiency and gave the monarchy greater control over far-flung provinces. Justice was emphasized as a royal duty. Khosrow earned the title Anushirvan the Just because of his reputation for fairness in law. He was remembered for listening to petitions punishing corrupt officials and ensuring that even commoners had some access to royal justice. In foreign affairs, Khosrow balanced war and diplomacy. With Byzantium, he fought a series of campaigns that brought victories, but also concluded treaties when useful. In 532 CE, he signed the so-called Eternal Peace with the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, though the peace lasted barely 8 years. War broke out again in 540 CE, when Khosrow invaded Syria and captured Antioch, one of Byzantium's greatest cities. Yet unlike a reckless conqueror, he avoided overstretching. After securing ransom and tribute, he often returned conquered territories, preferring wealth and stability to endless expansion. Khosrow also looked east. He campaigned against the Hephthalites, nomadic enemies in Central Asia, securing Persia's borders and trade routes. By maintaining control over the Silk Road, he ensured steady revenue from commerce. His reign thus combined military strength with economic foresight. Society under Khosrow reflected both continuity and reform. Nobles retained their privileges, but their power was balanced by stronger central authority. The priesthood of Zoroastrianism remained influential, but the crown maintained supremacy. Ordinary people, though still bound by heavy taxation, enjoyed greater security and predictability than under earlier kings. The memory of Khosrow's reign endured long after the empire's fall. In Persian literature and later Islamic writings, he was celebrated as the model of a just and wise king. Even his enemies respected him. In the Byzantine world, he was feared, but admired a ruler whose discipline and vision made Persia Rome's most formidable rival. By the time of his death in 579 CE, the empire was at its height. Its finances were strong, its army disciplined, its borders secure, and its culture thriving. Khosrow wine had given Persia a golden age, one that future generations would look back upon as the pinnacle of Sassanid greatness. But golden ages never last forever. After Khosrow, the empire would face new challenges, new wars, and new crises that would slowly erode its strength. For now, though, Persia stood proud, a beacon of order, justice, and power in a world often filled with chaos. The role of religion and ideology. In the Sassanid Empire, religion was not something separate from politics. It was woven into every corner of society. Zoroastrianism, the ancient faith of Persia, was not just a belief system, it was the very backbone of the state. From the coronation of kings to the daily lives of farmers, it shaped how people understood the world and their place in it. At the heart of Zoroastrianism stood the struggle between good and evil. Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, faced the destructive spirit Angra Mainyu, the force of darkness and lies. Life was seen as a battlefield between these two powers. Every choice mattered. To tell the truth, to keep the fire pure, to care for the earth, these were not just personal duties. They were cosmic responsibilities, part of a grand struggle to uphold order against chaos. For the Sassanid monarchy, this worldview was a gift. Kings were portrayed as guardians of order chosen by Ahura Mazda to defend truth and light. Royal inscriptions often showed the king receiving the divine ring of power directly from the god. This message was clear: to obey the king was to obey the will of heaven. To rebel was to side with darkness. The clergy, known as the Magi, became powerful partners of the crown. They controlled fire temples, codified rituals, and preserved sacred texts. They also played a role in government, advising kings on law and morality. Priests judged disputes, supervised religious festivals, and guided family life. Their presence in society was everywhere, from the humblest village to the royal palace. Religion was not only about worship, it shaped law and social order. Zoroastrian purity rules influenced daily routines, how people handled water, fire, and even the disposal of the dead. Marriage and family were seen as sacred duties. Society itself was structured around religious principles, with each class, priests, warriors, farmers, and artisans, expected to uphold its own sacred role. But the dominance of Zoroastrianism also brought tension. The empire was home to many faiths. Christianity had spread widely after the 3rd century. Armenia to the northwest became the first Christian kingdom in 301 CE, bringing Christianity into direct contact with Persia. Jews had lived in Mesopotamia for centuries, forming vibrant communities. Buddhism entered through Central Asia. A new religion, Manichaeism, was born within Persia itself in the 3rd century, blending ideas from Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism. The Sassanid response to these faiths varied. At times, tolerance was possible. Shapur I allowed Mani, the founder of Manichaeism, to preach for a time. Some kings permitted Christian communities to worship freely, especially when Rome, now Christian, was an enemy persecuting Christians in Persia, might push them toward loyalty to Byzantium. But at other times, persecution was fierce. Christians in particular were often seen as potential traitors, their faith tied to Rome. Many were martyred under rulers who demanded loyalty to Zoroastrianism above all. This pattern of tolerance and repression reflected the empire's struggle to balance unity with diversity. Zoroastrianism gave the state its identity and strength. But diversity was a reality of empire. Traders, travelers, and conquered peoples brought new beliefs, and these beliefs could not be erased. Instead, they shaped the empire's intellectual and cultural life, creating both richness and conflict. Ideology extended beyond religion into art and politics. Rock reliefs carved into cliffs depicted kings trampling enemies under their horses or standing beside sacred fire altars. Coins showed fire temples alongside royal portraits. These images were propaganda blending ideology and power. They reminded subjects that the empire was not only strong, but also divinely guided. The close bond between throne and altar gave stability. It justified the monarchy and gave the people a sense of purpose. But it also created rigidity. When crises came, rebellions, defeats, or social unrest, the crown and priesthood often responded with greater orthodoxy, tightening religious control instead of adapting. This rigidity would become a weakness in the empire's final century, when flexibility might have saved it. Still, for centuries, the role of religion and ideology gave the Sassanid Empire its soul. It bound people together under a common vision, it legitimized rulers, and it gave meaning to daily life. To live in Persia was to live in a world where politics, society, and faith were not separate but one. A world where the King of Kings ruled by divine light, and every citizen carried a duty in the eternal struggle between truth and falsehood. Endless wars with Byzantium. By the 6th century, the old Roman Empire had changed. Its western half had collapsed under waves of invasions, but its eastern half, the Byzantine Empire, stood strong in Constantinople. Across the frontier, the Sassanid Empire also remained powerful. Together, these two empires were the giants of the Near East, locked in a rivalry that seemed without end. The wars between Byzantium and Persia were not new. For centuries, Rome and the Sassanids had fought over Armenia, Mesopotamia, and Syria. But under rulers like Khosrow I and later Khosrow II, the struggle became fiercer and more destructive. These wars were not small raids. They were full-scale conflicts that drained treasuries, burned cities, and reshaped the map. In 572, CE war erupted again after fragile treaties collapsed. Byzantium supported a rebellion in Armenia, angering the Sassanids. Khosrow I struck back, invading Roman territory. The fighting dragged on for decades, with cities changing hands and fortresses besieged. Though neither side achieved decisive victory, both paid dearly in men and money. By 591 CE, however, a turning point came. Khosrow II, who had briefly lost his throne in a civil war, was restored to power with Byzantine help. The Emperor Maurice sent an army that placed Khosrow back on the throne in Ctesiphon. In return, Khosrow granted Byzantium territory and peace. For a moment, it seemed the two empires might coexist. But peace never lasted long on this frontier. In 602 CE, Emperor Maurice was murdered in Constantinople. Khosrow II seized this chance. Claiming to avenge his ally, he declared war on Byzantium. But this was no ordinary war. It was one of the greatest and most destructive conflicts of late antiquity. The Persian armies advanced with astonishing speed. In 611 CE, they captured Antioch, one of Byzantium's richest cities. In 613 CE, they took Damascus. In 614 CE, Jerusalem itself fell. The true cross, Christianity's holiest relic, was carried off to Persia. The shock to the Christian world was immense. Pilgrimage sites lay in ruins and entire provinces slipped from Byzantine control. Persia did not stop there. By 619 CE, Khosrow's generals conquered Egypt, the breadbasket of Byzantium. For the first time in history, Persia controlled both Mesopotamia and the Nile. The empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the deserts of Arabia. It seemed as if the dream of Shapur I to push Rome aside and make Persia the sole master of the Near East had finally come true. Yet this triumph was deceptive. The Persian campaigns demanded enormous resources. Armies had to be supplied across vast distances. Cities had to be garrisoned, roads guarded, and tribute collected. The longer the war dragged on, the more it strained the empire. Meanwhile, Byzantium found new strength under Emperor Heraclius, who took the throne in 610 CE. At first, his empire was near collapse. Treasury empty, provinces lost, morale broken. Yet Heraclius reorganized the state, secured loans from the church, and rebuilt the army. In 622 CE, he launched a daring counterattack. Instead of defending his lands, he struck deep into Persian territory, moving through Armenia and into the heart of the empire. From 622 to 627 CE, Heraclius fought campaign after campaign, using speed and surprise to outmaneuver larger Persian forces. The climax came at the Battle of Nineveh in 627 CE, where Heraclius defeated the Persian army decisively. He marched toward Ctesiphon, forcing Persia into crisis. The defeat shook the Sassanid court. Nobles turned against Khosrow. In 628 CE, he was overthrown and executed, replaced by his son. Peace was signed soon after. The Byzantines regained their lost territories, and the true cross was returned to Jerusalem in a grand ceremony. The war had ended, but the cost was staggering. Byzantium was exhausted. Persia was shattered. Cities lay in ruins, treasuries were empty, and trust in the monarchy had collapsed. The endless wars between Byzantium and Persia had not produced a lasting victor. Instead, they had weakened both empires at the very moment a new power was rising in the deserts of Arabia. The rivalry that had defined centuries was coming to an end, but it ended not with one empire's triumph, but with both left vulnerable. The Arabs, united under Islam, would soon sweep across their borders. Internal strains and civil wars. Victory and defeat often come with hidden costs. For the Sassanid Empire, the endless wars with Byzantium left scars deeper than battlefields. After the dramatic overthrow of Khosrow II in 628 CE, Persia entered a period of chaos. Internal strains that had long been buried now tore the empire apart. For 2 decades, Persia was consumed not by foreign enemies, but by civil wars, assassinations, and a collapse of authority. The overthrow of Khosrow II was both necessary and dangerous. His ambitious wars had stretched Persia to its limits. Nobles and generals, weary of endless campaigns and heavy taxation, plotted against him. In 628 CE, they deposed him, imprisoned him, and finally executed him. His son Kavad II took the throne. But Kavad ruled for only a few months before dying, likely of plague. The throne then passed rapidly from one ruler to another. Between 628 and 632 CE, Persia saw an astonishing succession of kings. Ardashir III, still a child, was placed on the throne, but was murdered after a short reign. Generals and nobles supported rival claimants, each seeking power. Shapur, a general who had once led Persian armies to victory in Syria, seized the crown, but ruled for only 40 days before being killed. Queen Boran, one of Khosrow's daughters, became one of the rare women to rule Persia. She tried to restore stability by lowering taxes and seeking peace, but she too was murdered in the political storm. In just 4 years, nearly a dozen monarchs rose and fell. This chaos revealed how fragile the empire had become. The central authority that Ardashir I had built and that Khosrow I had strengthened was now gone. Instead, great noble families and generals fought for control. The crown, once sacred, had become a pawn in their struggles. The social fabric also frayed. Years of heavy taxation to fund wars had burdened farmers and merchants. Many villages were left poor, their lands devastated by armies passing back and forth. Peasants resented both the nobles who demanded taxes and the priests who enforced religious discipline. Some looked back at the Mazdakite movement of earlier times and wondered if reform had been crushed too quickly. The Zoroastrian priesthood, once the backbone of legitimacy, also suffered. Their close tie to the monarchy meant that each change of ruler undermined their authority. Rivalries grew within the clergy, weakening their ability to provide unity. Meanwhile, Christian and Jewish communities within Persia quietly endured, sometimes seeing opportunity in the empire's weakness. The army, too, was divided. Soldiers loyal to different generals fought against one another. Fortresses were seized and lost. Provinces drifted toward independence, caring little for the authority of Ctesiphon. On the frontiers, defenses crumbled. Nomadic raiders from Central Asia pressed into Persia's eastern provinces, while Arab tribes in the south grew bolder. Economically, the empire entered crisis. Trade routes that had once carried silk and spices were disrupted. Caravans feared bandits and civil war. Tax collection became erratic. Coinage, once stable and trusted, began to lose value. The wealth of Persia, once the envy of the world, was now vanishing into the hands of warring factions. Psychologically, the people lost faith. For centuries, the King of Kings had been seen as the protector of order, the chosen of Ahura Mazda. Now kings rose and fell like shadows. The divine image of monarchy was shattered. Without a strong crown, without unity, Persia seemed adrift. By the time Yazdegerd III, the grandson of Khosrow II, ascended the throne in 632 CE, the empire was exhausted. He was young and inexperienced, inheriting a realm broken by civil war, drained by decades of conflict, and weakened by plague that had killed thousands. Though he carried the royal title, his power was fragile. Many nobles ignored him, ruling their provinces as they wished. This period of internal strain left the empire vulnerable just as a new force was rising. In Arabia, the followers of the Prophet Muhammad had united under Islam. After his death in 632 CE, the Arab tribes launched a wave of conquests. Persia, weakened from within, would soon face this storm. The fall of the Sassanid Empire was not caused by one battle alone. It was prepared by years of division, assassinations, civil wars, and a collapse of trust. The endless wars with Byzantium had drained Persia's strength, but it was the internal breakdown that opened the door for conquest. The Eastern Front, nomads, and Turks. While Persia's eyes were often fixed westward toward Byzantium, its eastern frontiers told another story, one of constant pressure from nomads, shifting alliances, and sudden invasions. These threats from Central Asia did not always make headlines in Roman or Byzantine records, but they shaped Sassanid strategy for centuries. The Persians could never ignore the East, for from there came waves of horsemen who tested the empire's strength again and again. One of the earliest and most dangerous Eastern enemies were the Hephthalites, often called the White Huns. They were a nomadic confederation that surged into Central Asia during the 5th century CE. Skilled horsemen, masters of mounted archery, they swept across Bactria and into Persia's eastern provinces. In 484 CE, they dealt the Sassanids a crushing blow at the Battle of Herat. King Persian I himself was killed, his army destroyed. This defeat shook the empire to its core. For years afterward, Persia paid tribute to the Hephthalites, a humiliation that tarnished royal prestige. The Hephthalite menace lasted decades. Persian kings tried to buy peace with gold marriages and diplomacy, but the nomads remained a constant danger. Only later, in alliance with the rising power of the Western Turks, did the Sassanids finally defeat them. Yet victory brought new problems. The Turks, once allies, soon became rivals. Their power in the steppes of Central Asia grew, and their raids threatened Persia's northeastern provinces. The eastern frontier was difficult to defend. Unlike the Roman border, where forts and walls could be built along rivers and deserts, the eastern lands were open and vast. Caravans crossed deserts, mountains, and steppe. Nomads could appear suddenly, raid, and vanish before armies could respond. To guard against this, the Sassanids stationed troops in frontier garrisons, built fortresses, and relied on local allies. Still, no system was perfect. Raids burned, villages seized loot, and carried captives into slavery. Economically, the East was vital. Trade from China and India flowed through Central Asia, across the Silk Road, and into Persia. Control of these routes meant wealth, while their disruption meant loss. Thus, Persia was forced not only to fight nomads, but also to negotiate with them, ensuring that merchants could move safely. Sometimes this meant treaties, sometimes bribes, sometimes brutal campaigns. Culturally, contact with the East brought influences as well as threats. Buddhism entered Persia through Central Asian merchants. Artistic styles such as silk patterns and motifs from India and China blended into Persian designs. The empire's openness to trade meant it was also open to new ideas. Yet these cultural exchanges came at a cost, the constant risk of invasion. The pressure from the East drained resources. While kings like Khosrow, I reformed the army and secured victories, maintaining garrisons and fortresses along such vast frontiers was expensive. Soldiers needed land supplies and reinforcements. Nobles in the East sometimes acted independently, striking deals with nomads without the crown's permission. The more Persia fought Byzantium in the West, the weaker its eastern defenses became. The lesson was harsh, but clear. Persia could not afford to look in one direction only. Its empire stood between two worlds, Rome and the steppe. While Roman legions threatened cities, nomadic horsemen struck the countryside. While Roman emperors sought prestige, nomadic chiefs sought plunder. The Shahanshah had to balance both, often stretching resources thin. By the early 7th century, the Eastern Front remained unsettled. The Turks and other nomadic groups had not destroyed Persia, but they had weakened it. Villages were poorer trade, less secure, and morale lower in the borderlands. When the Great Byzantine War of 602–628 erupted, Persia poured its strength westward, leaving its eastern flank exposed. This constant two-front struggle, Byzantium on one side, nomads on the other, was one of the deepest burdens of the Sassanid state. It could never rest. Its armies could never stand down. And when civil wars erupted after Khosrow II, the eastern frontier crumbled further, just as new enemies prepared to march out of Arabia. The last great war with Byzantium, 602–628 CE. The rivalry between Byzantium and Persia had always been fierce, but the war that erupted in 602 CE was unlike anything before. It was the longest and most destructive conflict the two empires ever fought. For a generation, the Near East became a battlefield. Cities burned, provinces changed hands, and the struggle pushed both Byzantium and Persia to the edge of collapse. The spark came in Constantinople. In 602 CE, the Byzantine Emperor Maurice, who had once helped Khosrow II regain his throne, was overthrown and killed by a usurper named Phocas. Khosrow seized the opportunity. Claiming to avenge his ally, he declared war on Byzantium. But this was more than revenge. It was a chance to seize the rich provinces that Persia had always coveted. At first, the Persian advance was unstoppable. In 611 CE, their armies crossed into Syria and captured Antioch. In 613 CE, they took Damascus. The following year, they stormed Jerusalem. The city's churches were looted, and the true cross, the most sacred relic of Christianity, was carried off to Persia. The shock across the Christian world was immense. Pilgrims wept, bishops despaired, and Constantinople itself feared that the empire was doomed. Khosrow's generals pressed further. In 619 CE, they conquered Egypt, Byzantium's breadbasket. Control of the Nile meant that the Persians now held the key source of Byzantine grain. At the same time, they advanced into Asia Minor, threatening the very heart of the empire. By the early 620s, Byzantium was reduced to little more than Constantinople and parts of Greece. For the first time, it looked as if the dream of a Persian-dominated Near East might come true. But empires rarely fall so easily. In 610 CE, Heraclius had taken the Byzantine throne. At first, he faced disaster, empty treasuries, ruined provinces, and demoralized armies. Yet he proved to be one of Byzantium's greatest leaders. He reorganized the empire, drawing on church wealth to fund armies and introducing new military tactics. Instead of defending his shrinking empire, he struck boldly into Persian territory. From 622 to 627 CE, Heraclius led a series of daring campaigns deep into Armenia and Mesopotamia. He avoided direct sieges of strong Persian fortresses, instead cutting supply lines and striking at the heart of the empire. In 627 CE, he won a decisive victory at the Battle of Nineveh, defeating the Persian army in open battle. After this, he marched south, threatening Ctesiphon itself. The defeat was catastrophic for Persia. Nobles and generals, already weary of Khosrow II's endless wars and heavy taxation, turned against him. In 628 CE, Khosrow was overthrown by a coup led by his own son, Kavad II. The once mighty king of kings was executed in disgrace. The new rulers quickly sued for peace. Byzantium regained all its lost territories. The true cross was returned to Jerusalem in 630 CE, where Heraclius personally restored it in a grand ceremony. For Byzantium, it was a miraculous recovery. For Persia, it was the beginning of the end. Though the war ended with Persia still intact, the empire was hollow. Its treasury was drained. Its army was shattered. Its nobility was divided with rival factions scheming for power. Worse still, plague had swept through the empire during the conflict, killing tens of thousands, including Kavad II himself. In the next 4 years, Persia saw nearly a dozen rulers rise and fall in quick succession. The last great war had achieved nothing lasting. Byzantium and Persia returned to their old borders, but both were broken. Their long rivalry, which had once balanced the Near East, had destroyed them both. And as they staggered, weakened and divided, a new force was gathering in the Arabian Peninsula. United under Islam, the Arabs would soon march forth to claim the lands both empires had fought over for centuries. The War of 602 to 628 CE was the last great clash between Byzantium and Persia. It ended not in triumph, but in exhaustion. And in that exhaustion lay the seeds of both empires' downfall. The Arab Conquest begins. When the war with Byzantium ended in 628 CE, the Sassanid Empire was still standing, but it was gravely wounded. Its treasury was empty, its army was exhausted, and its throne was unstable. Civil wars had torn the crown from one weak ruler to another. Villages lay in ruins, trade routes faltered, and plague had carried away thousands. At this moment of deep weakness, a new force rose from the deserts of Arabia, a force united not by kings or noble houses, but by faith. In 632 CE, the Prophet Muhammad died in Medina, but his followers were not divided. They had forged a new community under Islam, united by belief in one God and inspired by a mission to spread their faith. Within months, Arab tribes that had long fought among themselves were now bound together. They had leaders, armies, and a sense of divine purpose. Their lands were poor in resources, but their warriors were fierce, mobile, and determined. And just beyond their deserts stood two exhausted giants, Byzantium and Persia. At first, the Persians underestimated the Arabs. They saw them as raiders, much like the nomads who had troubled the borders for centuries. In 633 CE, small Arab forces began striking into Persian territory in Mesopotamia. Local governors tried to repel them, but the Arabs moved quickly, using speed and surprise to outmaneuver larger armies. Victories at places like the Battle of Walaja in 633 showed that these were no ordinary raiders. They were organized, disciplined, and motivated. The decisive clash came at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE. The Persian army was vast, filled with heavily armored cavalry, elephants, and seasoned soldiers. The Arabs, though fewer, were light, flexible, and inspired. The battle lasted several days, fought in dust and chaos near the Euphrates River. In the end, the Persians broke. Their elephants panicked, their cavalry faltered, and their commander Rostam Farrokhzad was killed. The Arab victory was overwhelming. With the road open, the Arabs advanced deeper into Mesopotamia. In 637 CE, they captured Ctesiphon, the great capital of the Sassanids. Palaces, treasures, and archives fell into their hands. The wealth of centuries was carried off, and the heart of the empire was lost. For the first time in 400 years, Persia's capital belonged to someone else. But the Persians did not give up. For years, resistance continued. Local nobles rallied armies, provinces tried to hold out, and Yazdegerd III, the last Sassanid king, fled from city to city seeking allies. Yet the momentum was gone. In 642 CE, at the Battle of Nahavand, the Arabs won another decisive victory. Persian resistance collapsed. The battle became known among Muslim historians as the Victory of Victories, the moment Persia's fate was sealed. Still, the conquest was not instant. The rugged mountains of Iran, the deserts of Central Asia, and the stubborn pride of Persian nobles meant that fighting continued for nearly a decade. Cities resisted, revolts broke out, and Yazdegerd tried desperately to gather support. Yet the Arabs pressed on, offering terms of conversion or tribute, punishing resistance, and winning new allies with promises of fairer rule. By the mid-640s, most of Persia was under Arab control. Zoroastrian temples were destroyed or converted, though many fire altars survived in remote villages. Some Persians converted to Islam, while others held on to their faith, becoming a protected but taxed minority. Persian nobles either submitted, fled east, or were killed. The empire of Ardashir and Khosrow, of Shapur and Anushirvan, had come to an end. The Arab conquest was more than a change of rulers. It was the end of a world order that had lasted for centuries. The great rivalry between Rome and Persia, which had defined late antiquity, was over. In its place, a new civilization was rising, an Islamic empire that would stretch from Spain to Central Asia. Persia would become part of this world, its culture blending with Arab traditions, shaping Islam itself in profound ways. For the Sassanids, the Arab conquest was a catastrophe. But for history, it was a turning point, the moment when the torch passed from the old empires of antiquity to the new powers of the medieval world. The fall of Yazdegerd III, 651 CE. The Arab conquest swept across Persia with startling speed, but the empire did not fall all at once. For nearly 2 decades after Al-Qadisiyah and Nahawand, there remained a flicker of resistance embodied in one man, Yazdegerd III, the last king of kings of the Sassanids. His reign tells the story of a dynasty fighting desperately for survival, even as its power crumbled piece by piece. Yazdegerd III came to the throne in 632 CE, still a boy of about 8 years old. He was the grandson of Khosrow II, the mighty conqueror who had once humbled Byzantium but left Persia shattered. From the beginning, Yazdegerd's rule was fragile. Civil wars had weakened the throne, nobles were divided, and the army was demoralized. Yet in him, many Persians placed their hopes. He carried the blood of Ardashir, Shapur, and Khosrow. He was the last thread tying Persia to its ancient past. As Arab armies advanced, Yazdegerd fled from one stronghold to another. First from Ctesiphon, then eastward through Media Persis, and finally into the distant lands of Khorasan. Everywhere he went, he tried to rally support. He called upon nobles, governors, and generals to rise for the empire. Some answered, but many hesitated. Exhausted by decades of war, wary of Arab power, and divided by local rivalries, they offered only half-hearted resistance. Yazdegerd appealed to foreign powers as well. He sought aid from the Turks of Central Asia, hoping they would help repel the Arabs. Some alliances were made, but they never provided the strength he needed. To the Turks, Persia was not a partner, but a weakened neighbor, and they gave little more than token support. The young king's authority was further undermined by mistrust. Some nobles saw him not as a savior, but as a liability. They feared that supporting him would bring Arab vengeance upon their lands. Others sought to preserve their own power by making deals with the conquerors. The once centralized monarchy of the Sassanids had fractured. By the late 640s, Yazdegerd was little more than a king in name. The Arabs controlled Mesopotamia, Persia's richest heartland. Provinces fell one by one: Khuzestan, Fars, and Media. Cities surrendered in exchange for protection. The royal treasury was gone, the army shattered, and the Zoroastrian priesthood no longer able to rally the people as it once had. In 651 CE, Yazdegerd's long flight came to an end in the city of Merv in present-day Turkmenistan. According to tradition, he sought refuge there, still hoping to gather an army, but fate betrayed him. A local miller or noble seeking favor with the Arabs, or weary of sheltering a powerless king, killed him. His death was ignoble, struck down not on the battlefield, but in hiding far from the grandeur of Ctesiphon. With his death, the Sassanid dynasty ended. The fall of Yazdegerd III was more than the death of a man. It was the death of an idea, the idea that Persia could still stand as an equal to Rome, that it could defend its ancient heritage, that its monarchy was divinely chosen and eternal. The empire that had once captured Roman emperors, humbled Byzantium, and ruled from the Tigris to the Indus was no more. Yet Yazdegerd's memory endured. In later Persian tradition, he became a tragic figure, the last king of a glorious line betrayed by fate and by his own people. Zoroastrian communities preserved his name in their prayers, mourning the fall of their empire. Even under Islamic rule, Persians remembered that they had once been ruled by kings of kings. The Arabs buried the Sassanid Empire, but they could not bury its culture. Persian identity survived, transforming under new rulers. Yazdegerd's death closed one chapter, but it opened another, the beginning of Persia's role within the Islamic world, where its language, traditions, and scholarship would continue to shape history. Thus, in 651 CE, with the fall of Yazdegerd III, the curtain closed on 4 centuries of Sassanid power. The empire was gone, but its legacy was only beginning. What remained Persian culture under Islam? When Yazdegerd III fell in 651 CE, the Sassanid Empire collapsed, but Persia itself did not vanish. Conquered, yes, defeated, certainly. Yet its culture, traditions, and spirit lived on, reshaped under new rulers. The Arabs had overthrown the dynasty, but they could not erase Persia's long history or its deep identity. Instead, much of what the Sassanids built flowed into the Islamic world, influencing it for centuries. One of the most enduring legacies was administration. The Arabs who conquered Persia were skilled warriors, but they did not yet possess the complex systems needed to govern such a vast and diverse empire. The Sassanids had perfected these systems over centuries: taxation, land surveys, provincial governors, and bureaucratic offices. Instead of destroying them, the Arabs adopted them. Persian scribes, secretaries, and administrators became indispensable in the new Islamic caliphate. For generations, the machinery of Persian government continued to operate only under Arab rulers. Language followed the same path. While Arabic became the official language of the caliphate, Middle Persian remained in use for centuries, especially in administration and literature. Gradually, it evolved into New Persian, written in Arabic script, but carrying the old traditions of the land. This Persian language would later flourish under Islamic dynasties, producing poetry, philosophy, and science that shaped the medieval world. Religion, however, faced greater change. Zoroastrianism, once the soul of the empire, became a minority faith. Many Persians converted to Islam, whether out of conviction, opportunity, or the heavy tax imposed on non-Muslims. Yet Zoroastrian communities survived, especially in rural villages and among priests who preserved the sacred fire. Even today, Zoroastrians in Iran and in India, the Parsis, trace their heritage back to the fall of the Sassanids. Culturally, the Persians left a deep imprint on the Islamic world. Art, architecture, and literature carried Persian influence. Palaces with grand domes and arches inspired Islamic architecture. Court traditions, royal ceremony titles, and etiquette were borrowed directly from Sassanid models. The concept of a powerful king surrounded by ceremony and divine aura passed from the Shahanshah to the caliphs. Science and philosophy, too, bore Persian marks. The great academy of Shapur, founded under Shapur I and expanded under Khosrow, continued to flourish under Islamic rule. It became a center where Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge blended, especially in medicine and astronomy. Many of these works were later translated into Arabic, fueling the golden age of Islamic scholarship. Without Persia's scholars and traditions, the Islamic world would have been poorer in knowledge. Persian culture also enriched daily life. Carpets, textiles, metalwork, and ceramics remained prized. Persian gardens, designed with flowing water and symmetrical beauty, inspired Islamic garden design from Spain to India. Even in religion, Persian traditions left subtle marks. Some customs and festivals like Nowruz, the Persian New Year, survived under Islam and are still celebrated today across Iran, Central Asia, and beyond. Militarily, Persian techniques influenced the caliphate's armies. The use of cavalry armor and battlefield organization borrowed heavily from Sassanid models. Persian generals and soldiers served under Arab banners, teaching tactics that expanded the caliphate's power. Yet this blending was not one-sided. While Persia shaped the Islamic world, Islam reshaped Persia. The old noble houses where weakened temples lost their central role, and the rigid class structure of the Sassanids slowly gave way to new Islamic identities. Conversion created new elites tied not to Zoroastrian priesthood, but to Islamic authority. Over time, Persia ceased to be a conquered land and became a vital part of the Islamic Empire. Perhaps the greatest survival was identity. Even under foreign rule, Persians continued to see themselves as heirs of a great tradition. This pride would resurface centuries later when Persian dynasties such as the Sassanids and Safavids revived Persian language culture and statehood under Islamic banners. The memory of the Sassanids remained not as a lost world, but as a foundation to build upon. Thus, while the empire fell, Persia endured. Its systems, culture, and spirit flowed into Islam, strengthening the new civilization. The Sassanids may have been defeated, but their legacy shaped the medieval world in ways far greater than the conquerors may have imagined. Rome and Persia, a world transformed. For centuries, the story of late antiquity was the story of Rome and Persia, two giants locked in endless rivalry. From the Euphrates to the Caucasus, their armies clashed. From Antioch to Ctesiphon, their ambassadors negotiated and plotted. For 400 years, their struggle shaped the Near East. But with the fall of the Sassanids in 651 CE, that world was gone forever. The rivalry had been like a balance. Neither side could destroy the other. Rome, or Byzantium as the eastern half came to be known, was strong in the Mediterranean, with fleet cities and trade. Persia was strong in the east, with cavalry fortresses and Silk Road wealth. When one gained an advantage, the other fought back. Armenia, Mesopotamia, and Syria suffered constant invasions, but the frontier held. This balance of power created stability, even as it drained both empires. But the final war between 602 and 628 CE broke the balance. Byzantium survived, but only barely. Its provinces in the east had been devastated, its armies thinned, and its treasury emptied. Persia did worse. Its monarchy collapsed, its nobles fought each other, and its people lost faith in their rulers. The old order cracked, leaving both exhausted when the Arabs appeared. The transformation was sudden. In just 2 decades, after 632 CE, Arab armies swept through lands that Rome and Persia had fought over for centuries. Syria, Palestine, Egypt, once bitterly contested between Byzantium and Persia, were taken by Islam. Mesopotamia and Iran, Persia's heartlands, fell as well. By 650 CE, the ancient rivalry was finished. The Arabs had replaced both as the dominant power in the region. This shift was more than military. It was cultural and religious. For centuries, Rome had defined itself as Christian, Persia as Zoroastrian. Each saw the other as the enemy of its faith, a mirror of opposition. Now Islam rose, replacing both. The Christian empire survived in Constantinople, but shrunken and besieged. The Zoroastrian empire disappeared, leaving only scattered communities. The religious map of the Near East was transformed forever. Economically, the change was just as great. The trade routes that once flowed through Persian and Byzantine hands were now controlled by the Caliphate. The Silk Road, the spice trade, the great markets of Mesopotamia all now paid taxes to Muslim rulers. The old imperial treasuries were gone, replaced by the revenues of Damascus and later Baghdad. Yet even in defeat, Persia left a mark. The Arabs inherited Persian systems of taxation, administration, and coinage. Byzantine traditions also survived, especially in law and military organization. The Islamic Empire was in many ways built on the foundations of both fallen rivals. Their centuries of rivalry had created structures and knowledge that did not vanish, but were absorbed. For the people of the Near East, the transformation was both loss and renewal. Cities destroyed in war now revived under new rulers. Farmers still plowed fields. Merchants still traded, scholars still wrote, but under a different banner. The names of the rulers had changed, and with them the world order. Looking back, the struggle of Rome and Persia seems both tragic and inevitable. Tragic because their endless wars drained their strength and opened the door to conquest. Inevitable because neither could allow the other to dominate the Near East. The rivalry defined them, but in the end, it destroyed them. By 651 CE, the Old World was gone. Rome survived in reduced form. Persia vanished as an empire, but endured in culture. The Arabs now held the torch, reshaping the region into a new civilization that would dominate for centuries. The transformation was complete. The age of Rome and Persia had ended. The age of Islam had begun. Legacy of the Sassanid Empire. Though the Sassanid Empire ended in 651 CE, its influence did not die. Far from it. Persia's culture, ideas, and institutions lived on, shaping the Islamic world, medieval Asia, and even later European thought. In many ways, the Sassanid legacy outlasted the empire itself. One of the most visible legacies was government. The Sassanids had created a centralized bureaucracy with clear systems of taxation administration and provincial control. The Arabs who conquered Persia quickly realized its usefulness. Instead of destroying it, they adopted it. Persian officials continued to manage records and finances under the caliphs. The idea of a powerful central state with governors appointed by the crown and taxes flowing to a central treasury was a Sassanid model that endured. Law and justice were another legacy. Khosrow, I remembered as Anushirvan the Just, had reformed laws to emphasize fairness and consistency. His example shaped later rulers, both Persian and Islamic. The idea that a king should be seen as the guardian of justice accessible to his people survived long after the Sassanid throne was gone. Culturally, the impact was even greater. Persian art, architecture, and literature left deep marks on the Islamic world. The grand domes and arches of Sassanid palaces inspired Islamic mosques, court ceremony, the rituals of kingship, the etiquette of nobles, the symbolism of royal crowns, passed from Persian kings to Islamic caliphs and sultans. Even the title of King of Kings echoed in later Persian dynasties, reminding them of their Sassanid forebears. The Persian language, though replaced in administration by Arabic for a time, survived and flourished. Out of Middle Persian grew New Persian, written in Arabic script, but carrying ancient traditions. This language produced poetry of immense beauty, works by Ferdowsi, Hafez, and Rumi that would shape the culture of the Middle East and Central Asia for centuries. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, written around 1000 CE, preserved the memory of the Sassanid kings, ensuring they would never be forgotten. Philosophy and science also carried Sassanid fingerprints. The Academy of Gunda Shapur, built under Shapur I and expanded under Khosrow. I had gathered Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge. Medicine, astronomy, and mathematics were studied there. When the Arabs conquered Persia, they inherited this treasure of learning. Later, much of it was translated into Arabic, fueling the Islamic Golden Age. Without Persia, the transfer of classical knowledge to the medieval world might never have happened. Religion, too, bore the Sassanid mark. Zoroastrianism became a minority faith, but its influence echoed. Ideas of angels, demons, final judgment, heaven and hell, core to Zoroastrian belief, found resonance in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The dual struggle between good and evil, central to Persian thought, remained a theme in later religious traditions. Even Islamic practices such as structured prayer times and ritual purity carried faint echoes of older Persian customs. Social traditions also endured. Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebrated at the spring equinox, survived centuries of conquest. Arabs, Turks, and Mongols who ruled Persia adopted the festival. Today, it is still celebrated across Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and even parts of the Middle East, a living reminder of the Sassanid world. Even politically, Persia's spirit survived. Though the empire fell, Persian identity endured. Under later Islamic dynasties, the Samanids, Buyids, and especially the Safavids Persian culture and statehood re-emerged. The Safavids in the 16th century even made Shia Islam the state religion of Persia, giving the land a unique identity within the Islamic world. In their art, literature, and kingship, they saw themselves as heirs to the Sassanids. The legacy of the Sassanid Empire also stretched westward. Byzantium adopted elements of Persian diplomacy and military organization. Europe, through Byzantium and the Islamic world, inherited Persian sciences, literature, and philosophy. The world of the Middle Ages was shaped in part by ideas born in Sassanid Persia. In the end, the Sassanid Empire's fall was dramatic, but its influence was lasting. It gave the world models of kingship, systems of government, treasures of culture, and visions of faith that endured long after its cities had fallen silent. To speak of Persia today is to speak of a land whose spirit could not be conquered, even when its empire was lost. The Sassanids were gone, but their shadow stretched across history. Conclusion: rise, glory, and ruin. The story of the Sassanid Empire is the story of ambition, brilliance, and decline. Born in 224 CE from the determination of Ardashir I, it rose on the ruins of the Parthians. It carried the torch of ancient Persia, reviving the memory of Cyrus and Darius. For 4 centuries it stood as Rome's equal, a rival that could not be ignored. Its kings built a state of central power united with Zoroastrian faith. Its armies humbled Roman emperors, captured cities, and expanded across the east. Under Shapur I, Persia reached glory through conquest. Under Khosrow I, it reached a golden age of reform, justice, and culture. Under Khosrow II, it stretched across the Near East, seizing Jerusalem and Egypt, standing at the edge of total triumph. But empires rarely collapse in one blow. Their ruin begins within. For the Sassanids, endless wars drained their wealth. Civil wars shattered their unity. Nobles and priests, once loyal to the crown, turned against weak kings. Farmers, burdened by heavy taxes, grew weary. Plagues killed thousands. When the Arabs came, Persia was no longer the strong, disciplined state it had once been. It was a broken empire waiting for the final strike. In 636 CE at Al-Qadisiyah, the Persians faltered. In 642 CE at Nahavand, they broke. In 651 CE, with the death of Yazdegerd III, the dynasty was gone. The Arabs carried their banners across Persia, bringing Islam new rulers and a new world. And yet the Sassanids did not vanish. Their palaces still stood, their art still inspired, their stories still told. Their systems of government became the foundation of the Islamic Caliphate. Their culture infused Arabic with Persian color. Their philosophy, science, and literature lived on in Baghdad, Samarkand, and beyond. Even centuries later, Persian dynasties looked back to the Sassanids as their ancestors, their example, their source of pride. The rise and fall of the Sassanid Empire reminds us of the cycle of history. Power can be built on ambition and discipline. Golden ages can shine with culture and justice. But overreach, division, and exhaustion can undo even the mightiest dynasties. In the end, the Sassanids left a legacy larger than their borders. They were Rome's rivals, Islam's predecessors, and Persia's eternal memory. Their story is one of rise, glory, and ruin, but also of endurance. For while the empire fell, Persia lived on, shaping the world for centuries to come.